courtroom was still, unnaturally quiet for a place that usually buzzed with chatter. Clicking heels and shuffling papers, the air felt heavy, like everyone inside was holding a collective breath. Cameras were banned, but nearly every major news outlet in Ohio had a reporter sitting near the back, scribbling furiously or whispering into voice recorders. The case had gripped the small town of Ashford for weeks, but no one, not even the seasoned prosecutor, the veteran judge, or the sharp-eyed jurors, was prepared for the moment that was about to unfold. At the center of the case was a little girl named Lily. She was only 3 years old, tiny in her seat. Lily looked almost swallowed by the large oak witness stand. She sat cross-legged, holding a worn-out teddy bear in one hand and gripping the edge of her seat with the other. Her hair had been brushed neatly into pigtails that morning, but the ends were already frizzing out from nervous fidgeting. Her wide brown eyes darted nervously across the room, never focusing on anyone for long. She hadn't spoken a word since the day authorities had found her, and that day had been horrific. Police officers discovered Lily locked inside a dark basement, malnourished, covered in bruises, and too frightened to speak. The details were grim. She had no toys, no food, and no explanation for the injuries on her body. Her mother's boyfriend, a man named Gregory Turner, was arrested on the spot. He claimed Lily was simply clumsy and had fallen down a flight of stairs. He insisted he had tried to help her, but panicked when he saw blood. He painted himself as a helpless bystander. But investigators weren't buying it. Neither were the prosecutors, unfortunately. Without Lily's testimony, the case was murky. There were no clear witnesses. Her mother was uncooperative, clearly under Greg's influence, and refused to testify. The forensic evidence was strong, but not conclusive. And Lily was the only person who knew exactly what had happened. But she hadn't said a single word, not to doctors, not to detectives, not to the kind foster family that had taken her in. She didn't cry. She didn't play. She just stared, often at nothing. Now, she sat in court silent, withdrawn, and terrified. People whispered, why would they even put her on the stand? But the prosecutor, Margaret Lane, had a plan. It wasn't just about what Lily would say. It was about what she might show, especially when someone very special entered the courtroom door opened slowly, and it patted a large, calm German shepherd. His name was Ranger, a retired police dog turned certified court therapy K9. He had once been deployed in search and rescue missions, finding missing persons and comforting traumatized survivors. After retiring, he was retrained to work with children, especially those too frightened to speak. Gasps spread across the room. Ranger walked quietly past the benches, past the attorneys, and toward Lily. Lily spotted him instantly. Her eyes widened. Her whole posture shifted. For the first time since entering the courtroom, she moved with purpose. She leaned forward, dropped her teddy bear, and stretched out a hand. Ranger gently pressed his nose into her palm. A wave of stunned silence washed over the courtroom. She didn't flinch. She didn't pull back. She stroked his fur. Margaret Lane stepped forward, cautiously, eyes flicking between Lily and the jury. She spoke softly, deliberately. Lily, sweetheart, do you remember Ranger? Lily didn't speak, but she gave a small nod. Do you remember who helped you feel safe? Lane asked, now kneeling beside the witness stand. Lily blinked, slowly, then looked straight at Ranger. She didn't smile, but something changed in her face. A small light turned on behind her eyes. Lane reached behind her and retrieved 3 laminated photos. She showed them to Lily one by one. The first photo was of Ranger. The second was of Lily's mother. The third was of Gregory Turner. Lily stared at them all. Then, without hesitation, she pointed directly to the photo of Ranger. A whisper of surprise rippled through the courtroom. Lane asked gently, who helped you? Lily, still, no words. Then Lily did something that nearly made the judge drop his gavel. She slid off the stand, kneeled beside Ranger, and hugged him around the neck. Her head rested on his shoulder. Her fingers curled into his fur. No one moved. Not the judge, not the jury, not the defendant. The courtroom had turned into a cathedral, every soul hushed in awe. Margaret Lane didn't push further. She turned to the judge and said calmly, Your Honor, I believe this child just gave us more than words ever could. Judge Ellis, a no-nonsense former military lawyer with decades of experience, nodded solemnly. He had seen hardened criminals break down. He had seen families torn apart in bitter custody fights. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had ever chilled him the way Lily's silent reaction just had. Meanwhile, across the room, Gregory Turner looked increasingly uneasy. His eyes flicked nervously from Lily to Ranger, then to the jury. For the first time since the trial began, his confident posture slumped. The people in the courtroom didn't need a translator. Lily hadn't spoken, but she had communicated everything, and whatever she was about to say next would change the entire trial. Ashford had always prided itself on being a safe place, quiet neighborhoods, Sunday barbecues, and families who never locked their front doors. But beneath the surface, like so many American towns, shadows hid in plain sight. When Lily's case broke into the news, it didn't just shock residents, it shattered their sense of safety. They couldn't believe that such cruelty had unfolded in a modest yellow house on Maple Street, the kind with wind chimes on the porch and flower pots in every window. Gregory Turner had lived there for over a year with Lily's mother, Jessica. He was well known, even liked, a contractor by trade. He had renovated several local homes and even volunteered to fix the church roof for free. He was charming, good with kids, or so it seemed, and had once donated toys to a foster center during Christmas. Nobody suspected him, nobody except for Lily's daycare worker, Miss Dana Wilcox. She had noticed the bruises, first dark marks on Lily's back and arms, then scratches that didn't match a simple fall. When asked, Lily had lowered her head and refused to answer. Dana reported it to Child Protective Services, but Jessica claimed Lily was clumsy and had always bruised easily. CPS followed protocol, visited the home, and found nothing, no visible signs of abuse, no unsafe conditions. But then came the phone call that changed everything. It was a neighbor, an older woman named Martha Simmons, who heard a child screaming from the basement window during a thunderstorm. She walked over with an umbrella, planning to knock on the door, but then the light inside flicked off and silence returned. Martha trusted her instincts. She called the police. When officers arrived, Greg answered the door looking tired and annoyed. He claimed Lily was at her grandmother's, but Martha insisted she heard her voice. With legal backing, police forced entry. What they found horrified them. The basement was unfinished concrete floors, exposed wires, and a single mattress. In the corner, Lily was curled up beneath a torn blanket, arms wrapped around her knees. Her face was bruised, lips split, and the right side of her torso had faint burn marks. She didn't speak. She didn't scream. She just blinked at the flashlight and held out a hand as if begging for silence. She had learned not to make noise. Greg was arrested on the spot. Jessica cried, pleaded for his release, and insisted it was all a misunderstanding. CPS immediately placed Lily with emergency foster care. The town went from silent disbelief to fury almost overnight. People rallied in front of the courthouse, demanding justice. But inside the legal system, the case was fragile. Jessica refused to testify, choosing to protect Greg, and Lily, the only real witness, was so traumatized she hadn't spoken a word. For weeks, therapists tried to reach her. They used dolls, drawings, even songs, but she remained silent, trapped in her own world, until the prosecution called Margaret Lane. Lane had worked on child advocacy cases for 20 years. She'd seen the worst of humanity and knew the signs of deep trauma, but she also knew the power of trust. Sometimes the key wasn't a lawyer, a doctor, or even a parent. It was something far simpler, something like a dog. She had heard of Ranger from a colleague in a different district. The retired K-9 had already assisted into trials involving children, both resulting in convictions. Unlike therapy animals that only provided comfort, Ranger had been trained to sense anxiety, provide grounding pressure, and recognize subtle emotional cues. He didn't just sit beside children, he anchored them. So she reached out. Ranger and his handler, Officer Kevin Marsh, drove down from Columbus and met Lily during a private session at her foster home. What happened next amazed even the foster parents. The moment Ranger entered the room, Lily didn't hide. She didn't cry or scream or run. She stared for a long time, then slowly reached out. Ranger sat down beside her and gently rested his head on her knee. She petted him, silent, careful, deliberate. For 20 minutes, neither of them moved. When it was time for him to leave, Lily followed him to the door. It was the first time she had willingly stood up without being asked. From that moment on, Ranger became part of the legal strategy. Margaret didn't want to push Lily to speak. She didn't need a full testimony. What she wanted was presence, emotion. proof that the child could respond to safety and react to fear. The plan was radical, and the defense team scoffed. They believed Lily would sit mute, possibly confused, and that the jury would dismiss her behavior as irrelevant. But when Ranger entered the courtroom and Lily reached for him, everything changed. Her silence became a statement. Her reaction pointing at his photo, hugging him, acknowledging him as her source of safety was not just touching, it was damning. Margaret Lane knew it wasn't just about what Lily would say. It was about what Greg couldn't. He couldn't explain why Lily trusted a dog she barely knew more than him. He couldn't explain why a child he claimed to love wouldn't even look at him. And soon, very soon, he wouldn't be able to explain the next thing Lily would do something that would destroy any remaining doubt in the jury's mind. Because Margaret was preparing for the moment Lily would whisper the two words that would stop the court cold. The next morning, the courtroom buzzed with quiet murmurs. Word had already spread about the dog how a silent toddler had pointed to him and hugged him like a life raft. Local media called it the trial's most unexpected moment, and national outlets were starting to take notice. But for those inside the courtroom, the real story hadn't even begun. The prosecution had something planned for this very day. Judge Ellis called the session to order. The bailiff announced the return of the child witness, Lily. The heavy doors creaked open, and once again, Lily entered, this time hand in hand with Officer Marsh. Ranger trotted beside them, calm and composed. He wore no vest, no leash. He didn't need either. The dog moved like he belonged there, like he knew his mission wasn't over yet. Lily looked more alert than before. Her hair had been tied back in a neat braid, and she clutched Ranger's softly between her fingers. She didn't appear afraid, but she didn't speak either. When she reached the witness stand, she climbed up by herself and sat down, Ranger curling at her feet. Gasps rippled quietly through the crowd when she reached out and rested her small hand on his head. Margaret Lane stood slowly, holding a soft voice and an open posture. "Lily," she began, "is Ranger your friend?" Lily nodded once. "Do you feel safe when he's near you?" Another nod. Margaret's tone was warm, gentle. "Can you tell us something about the day you met Ranger? Anything you remember?" For a moment, Lily said nothing. Then she leaned forward and whispered something into Ranger's ear, so softly no one could hear it. Margaret smiled. "It's okay. You don't have to say it loud. Just look at him. Is he someone who makes you feel okay again?" Lily didn't respond with words. Instead, she slid down from the chair and knelt beside Ranger just like before. She placed both arms around his neck and laid her cheek against his fur. It wasn't a dramatic outburst. There were no tears or cries, but the effect was explosive. Jurors blinked away emotion. Even Judge Ellis looked away for a moment, jaw tightening, to see a child who had been too terrified to speak, to hurt to engage with the world, now embracing a protector in open court. That wasn't just a moment. It was a revelation. Margaret turned to the jury. "Lily doesn't need to say much. Her actions are louder than words." The defense attorney, Mark Dwyer, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His strategy had relied on discrediting the child's silence as meaningless, but now, that silence was screaming. Still, he wasn't ready to give up. He stood, buttoned his coat, and approached the bench with cautious steps. "With all due respect," he said, addressing Judge Ellis, "a dog is not evidence. The jury is reacting emotionally. We haven't heard a word that connects my client to any abuse." Judge Ellis raised an eyebrow. "And yet, here you are reacting emotionally too." Margaret didn't interrupt. She knew what was coming. Mark turned to Lily, attempting a gentler approach. "Lily," he said softly, "do you know who I am?" She looked at him briefly, then back at Ranger. He tried again. "Do you remember Greg? He lived in your house, right?" Still, no answer. "Did Greg ever hurt you, Lily?" The question was direct. Everyone held their breath. Lily didn't move. "Did anyone hurt you?" he asked, voice rising just slightly. At that, Ranger's ears perked up. He shifted slightly and let out a low huff, barely a sound, but noticeable. Lily's head turned quickly toward the noise. Then she did something no one expected. She picked up a marker from the table beside her. Without a word, she began drawing on a notepad provided by the court's child psychologist. Margaret stepped forward. "Let her draw," she said. "Let's see what she shows us." Lily's hand moved carefully, thoughtfully, first a house, then a stick figure with long hair, her mother, then a smaller figure herself, and then another. Larger figure beside her, a man with sharp lines around his mouth. His hands were scribbled with red. Finally, she drew a dog, clearly Ranger standing between the small girl and the large man. She circled the dog, and then, with slow precision, she wrote just the letters under the man with the red hands, H-E. Then she pointed to the man, then to the word, and finally back at Ranger. Margaret leaned in gently. "Lily, can you tell us who this is?" Lily didn't say anything, but she reached out and tapped twice on the notepad, once on the drawing of the man, then on the two letters, he. It read. Then she did something that electrified the room. She whispered softly, just loud, enough for the microphone to pick up the simple words. "He hid." There was a pause, then stunned silence. Judge Ellis leaned forward. "Can you repeat that?" Lily, but she had already returned to hugging Ranger, her face buried in his shoulder. Margaret turned slowly to the jury, voice steady, but filled with gravity. "You've just heard the only words Lily has spoken about this case, and you've seen how she reacts to safety versus danger. She didn't just point. She didn't just draw. She told you exactly what happened." "He hid," Mark Dwyer stammered, something under his breath, but it was clear his defense was crumbling. The courtroom wasn't quiet anymore. It was stunned, and nothing would be the same again. The gallery buzzed like a low drumbeat. Reporters scribbled, jurors exchanged glances, and the judge sat with his hands steepled, his jaw locked in stone. He had heard thousands of testimonies in his career, but never one like this, a child's. Broken whisper, "He hid," was echoing louder than a full confession. The moment hit everyone differently. Some looked stunned, others angry, and still others heartbroken. Gregory Turner sat frozen, until now. His face had worn a carefully rehearsed look of concern, but when Lily whispered those two words, something changed. His eyes widened. He sat back, shoulders stiff, and blinked twice too fast. The calm mask slipped for a moment, and in that flicker of uncertainty, the jury saw him, not as a misunderstood man, but as a guilty one. Prosecutor Margaret Lane didn't waste a moment. She approached the bench with quiet confidence. "Your Honor," she said, "I request a brief recess to allow the child witness to rest. She's done more than anyone expected today." Judge Ellis nodded without hesitation. "Granted. Court will recess for 45 minutes. The courtroom erupted in low murmurs as people stood and stretched. Jurors exited through the side door, still whispering among themselves. Lily was gently escorted out by Officer Marsh and Ranger. Her tiny hand clutched the dog's ear like a security blanket. She never looked back. Gregory's attorney, Mark Dwyer, immediately pulled his client aside, face pale. "Do you know what she just did?" he hissed. Greg's voice was sharp. "She didn't say my name. You heard it. She didn't say my name." Dwyer was shaking his head. "She didn't need to. Everyone in that room knows she was talking about you. And we both know there's more coming." Greg leaned in, lowering his voice. "You're supposed to protect me. Do your job." "I'm trying," Dwyer snapped. "But a dog just destroyed your defense more effectively than any adult witness I've ever seen. And that kid," the moment she spoke, she became the heart of the case. In the hallway, Margaret Lane stood with her team, reviewing next steps. They had more evidence, a surprise piece they hadn't yet introduced, the audio, and now it would hit even harder. But she wasn't smiling. The moment had affected her, too. "She's still scared," Lane said softly. Even now, her assistant nodded. "But she spoke. She chose to. That matters, more than we know," Lane murmured. When court resumed, the room filled more quickly than before. Reporters had already started uploading early drafts of their stories. The headline practically wrote itself. 3-year-old breaks silence with 2 words that could break the case. Lily did not return to the stand. The judge had granted her team's request to let her rest. A ranger remained seated at the side of the courtroom, in full view of the jury. His quiet presence was a reminder. Truth had already been spoken. Margaret Lane stood again. "Your Honor," she said, "with the court's permission, we'd like to present audio evidence collected legally from a neighbor's baby monitor during the night in question." Dwyer rose immediately. "Objection. The audio is incomplete. It lacks context. This will bias the jury further." Judge Ellis didn't flinch. "The jury will decide what weight to give it." Objection overruled. A technician wheeled in a speaker. Lane nodded, and the courtroom fell into absolute silence once again. The recording crackled to life. First, nothing but white noise. Then came faint sounds, a child sob, a distant thump, a door creaking. The sobs grew louder. Then, A man's voice muffled, agitated. "Shut up." I said quiet. A pause, then a high-pitched cry. And finally, "He's coming. Hide. Hide." There was a scuffle. More sobbing. A loud thud. Then silence. Then footsteps, fading. When the recording ended, the courtroom sat in stunned stillness. Lane didn't say anything at first. She let the audio sink in. Then she spoke. That voice belongs to the defendant. And those cries, those came from a terrified 3-year-old, locked in a basement, begging for someone to hide her. She walked slowly across the room. She wasn't hiding from a stranger. She was hiding from someone inside the home. Someone she knew. Someone who told her to be quiet, then left her alone in the dark. She turned toward the jury, and today, she told you what happened. He hid. Those words were simple, but powerful. She didn't have the language for legal arguments or timelines. But she knows what she saw, and more importantly, what she felt. Lane's voice dropped to a near whisper. "Fear doesn't lie." She sat down. Dwyer didn't stand right away. His hands were trembling. When he finally rose, his arguments fell paper thin. "The audio doesn't prove my client hurt her. It's incomplete. You don't know what really happened in that house. You're going off a child's whisper and a dog's presence." A juror raised an eyebrow. Another looked away, arms folded. The room had turned cold. Dwyer continued, "Ladies and gentlemen, children get scared. They misremember. They imagine things. It's not fair to hang a man's future on the fears of a child who may not even understand what she's saying." It was the wrong tone, and the jury knew it. He sat down slowly, knowing he was losing control. Judge Ellis looked at both sides. "We'll recess until tomorrow morning. Closing arguments will follow." The courtroom cleared, but no one spoke much on the way out. Everyone had heard it now. Not just the whispered words, not just the audio, but the truth that wrapped around both like a rope, tightening with every breath. The truth was no longer a question. It was becoming a verdict. Morning light streamed into the Ashford County Courthouse, casting long shadows across the polished floor. Outside, news vans lined the street, their antennas jutting skyward like silent observers. Inside, a different storm was building, one that didn't howl with wind or rain, but with rising doubt, fear, and the slow unraveling of a man who once thought himself untouchable. Gregory Turner sat alone in the defense waiting room, elbows on knees, face in hands. The smug confidence he carried since his arrest was gone. His suit hung wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot from a sleepless night. He didn't speak. He hadn't, since the audio had played. He didn't need to. His lawyer, Mark Dwyer, paced the room, clutching his notes like they might rearrange themselves into a miracle. "They're eating her alive," he muttered. "The jury, they've already made up their minds. That girl destroyed you, and the dog. God, the dog." Greg didn't look up. "She didn't say my name. She didn't have to." Dwyer snapped. "You think pointing to Ranger, whispering he hid, then showing a drawing of you with red hands didn't do the job? You think that's going to save you? I didn't touch her like that." Greg mumbled. "I swear." Dwyer dropped his notepad on the table. "Then who did? Who locked her in the basement? Who told her to shut up while she screamed? Who walked away? Because unless there's a ghost in that house, you're it." Greg finally looked up. "She's just a kid. She's confused." But even he didn't sound convinced anymore. Meanwhile, in the prosecutor's chamber, Margaret Lane sipped lukewarm coffee, eyes on her case notes. Across from her sat Detective Ellen Croft, the lead investigator on the case. "She crushed him yesterday," Croft said, scrolling through local coverage on her phone. Even the defense team looked like they wanted to vanish. Lane didn't. "Smile. We're not finished yet. You think we need more?" Croft asked. "I think we need to make sure it sticks," Lane replied. "No loopholes. No excuses. When that jury goes in to deliberate, they need to feel like they've already heard the verdict." Back in the courtroom, people filed in quietly, the energy solemn and expectant. Jurors returned to their seats, some with dark circles under their eyes. They had watched footage the night before. They had heard the audio again in their heads. One juror, a mother of two, had barely slept at all. Ranger entered first, tail swishing calmly and curled beside the witness box. Lily wouldn't return today. Her testimony was done, but Ranger's presence lingered like a silent truth teller, a reminder that some voices speak without words. Judge Ellis arrived and gavelled the court into session. We will now hear testimony from Officer Kevin Marsh, handler of the K-9, known as Ranger. Marsh took the stand with quiet authority, wearing his police uniform and a stern expression. His hand rested briefly on Ranger's head as he passed. "Officer Marsh," Lane began, "you worked with Ranger for how long?" 7 years, Marsh replied. "First in active duty search and rescue, narcotics and trauma response. Then in courtroom therapy with child victims. Is Ranger trained to respond to signs of trauma?" "Yes, ma'am. He can detect elevated heart rates, nervous body language, signs of PTSD. His job isn't just to comfort, he grounds children in high-stress situations, helps them feel safe enough to engage." "Did he show any special response to Lily?" Marsh nodded. "From the first meeting, he stayed closer to her than he usually does with new children. When she trembled, he pressed his body against her to provide pressure. When she wouldn't speak, she whispered into his ear instead. That's rare." "And in your professional opinion," Lane asked, "did Lily's behavior toward Ranger in court suggest trust?" "Absolutely, total trust. The kind that doesn't lie." Dwyer stood to cross-examine but struggled. "Officer, can you guarantee that what Lily whispered to the dog is factual?" "I'm not a mind reader," Marsh said evenly, "but I've worked with a lot of traumatized kids, and I've seen what truth looks like in their faces. That little girl was telling you exactly what she couldn't say out loud." The tension in the courtroom deepened. Dwyer sat down, visibly shaken. Margaret Lane stood once more. "Your Honor, the state rests its case." Judge Ellis turned to Dwyer. "Will the defense be presenting any witnesses?" Dwyer swallowed hard. "The defendant wishes to testify." Gasps rippled across the courtroom. Even Lane blinked in surprise. Greg rose and walked stiffly to the stand. His hands trembled slightly as he placed them on the Bible and swore the oath. Once seated, he tried to straighten his tie, but gave up. Dwyer approached. "Mr. Turner, did you abuse Lily?" "No," Greg said immediately. "I never touched her like that." "Did you lock her in a basement?" Greg hesitated. It wasn't like that. She ran down there when she was upset. I left the door closed by accident." The courtroom stirred. Lane leaned forward slightly. The lie was unraveling in real time. "Did you tell her to be quiet?" Dwyer asked. "I was overwhelmed," Greg stammered. "She wouldn't stop crying. I just needed a moment." Dwyer nodded, trying to paint him as a flawed but innocent man. But the moment Greg said, "I just needed a moment," 3 jurors visibly winced. Then it was Lane's turn. She stood slowly. "Mr. Turner," where Lily screamed and cried in fear. "What did you do?" "I panicked. When she begged someone to hide her." "What did you do?" "I went upstairs." Lane's voice dropped. "You left her alone, in the dark, injured." Greg looked at his hands. "I didn't mean to hurt her." "But you did." And when she whispered, he hid. She wasn't talking about monsters under the bed. She was talking about the one who should have protected her and ran. The courtroom went still again. Greg looked like a man already sentenced, and the jury, they looked ready to write the final chapter. The moment Greg Turner's final words slipped into the air, "I didn't mean to hurt her," a collective silence fell across the courtroom. It wasn't just the words. It was the hollow tone, the absence of remorse, the unwillingness to take full responsibility, the kind of silence that settles in when everyone knows what they've just heard is the truth, cloaked in denial. The judge called for a brief recess, and the courtroom slowly emptied, leaving behind echoes of whispered speculations and hurried texts. In the hallway, news anchors rehearsed their segments. Jurors were led to a private chamber, and Greg Turner was escorted back to the defense room, visibly shaken, inside the prosecutor's office. Margaret Lane stood by the window, watching clouds roll over the courthouse lawn. Detective Croft entered with a printout in her hand. "It just came in from the lab," she said, handing it over. Lane scanned the sheet. "This is the DNA test." Croft nodded. "Blood traces on the basement floor. Confirmed to be Lily's, mixed with his skin cells." Lane stared at the page. "We didn't even use this yet. Do we need to?" Croft asked. Lane's expression didn't change. "No, but if he somehow slips through the cracks, this will seal it." Back in the defense chamber, Dwyer leaned against the table, arms crossed, watching his client unravel. "You don't look good," he said. Greg sat with his head down. "I think they believe her. They do." Greg looked up, eyes red. "What if I tell them I lost control? That I snapped under stress, but never meant it?" Dwyer's voice sharpened. "They already saw through that. And don't forget the child psychologist's evaluation, Lily. Described you hiding behind the basement door. Greg stood up suddenly. Then I'll take the stand again. I'll tell them. I tried to help her afterward. No. Dwyer's voice was firm. You won't say another word. You got up there once and buried yourself. You're done talking. Meanwhile, in the jurors' chamber, the 12 men and women sat in uneasy quiet. One woman, a school teacher, finally spoke. I can't stop thinking about the way she pointed at the dog. Another, a father of 3, nodded. She trusted the dog more than any adult. That says everything. She didn't lie, said an older man. You can't coach that kind of truth. You just can't. When they returned to the courtroom, the air felt heavier, like something irreversible had happened. Lane stood, with her final witness, a child psychologist named Dr. Eva Ramos. Dr. Ramos, Lane began. You interviewed Lily twice following her rescue. What did you observe? She was withdrawn, highly sensitive to touch and sound. But when Ranger was introduced, her emotional response shifted significantly. She became calmer, more responsive. And in your professional opinion, Lane asked, did she demonstrate signs of trauma consistent with abuse? Yes, Dr. Ramos said. She displayed avoidance behaviors, specific fears tied to adult males, and regressive speech patterns. These are hallmark indicators. Were her drawings relevant? Extremely. One showed a stick figure with red hands standing at a staircase. Another showed a black box, likely a basement. She circled it in red. The courtroom grew. Still again. Did she verbalize anything directly? Dr. Ramos looked over at Ranger lying quietly near the jury box. She whispered one sentence while drawing. She said. She pointed to the red-handed figure and said, he watched, then left. Gasps echoed around the room. A reporter's pen slipped from their hand and clattered on the floor. Dwyer didn't cross-examine. He didn't even stand. Judge Ellis looked to the clock, then addressed the jury. If there are no further questions, both sides have now rested their cases. Closing arguments will begin tomorrow morning. Until then, you are dismissed. The courtroom emptied, slowly and silently. That night, news spread like wildfire. Local channels ran headlines. Toddler testifies without speaking. Entire town stunned. Therapy dog unlocks key testimony in abuse trial, whispers and drawings. The trial turning on a 3-year-old's courage. People across the state tuned in, many of them hearing Lily's name for the first time. Some wept at her story. Others seethed at the thought of what she endured. Social media exploded with hashtags, like hashtag justice for Lily and hashtag he hid. Meanwhile, at her foster home across town, Lily was tucked in bed, Ranger sleeping beside her. She didn't know what viral meant. She didn't know what justice was. But she knew she wasn't afraid anymore. Her foster mom, Claire, watched her sleep and whispered to her husband, she did it. She really did it. In her dreams, Lily was no longer trapped in the basement. She was running across an open field with Ranger at her side, the sky bright, the wind soft. Back at the courthouse, Greg Turner sat in a holding room. For the first time, he wasn't thinking about his money, his connections, or the judge. He was thinking about Lily, about the moment her tiny hand pointed at the dog, about the words that had gutted the courtroom. He hid, and no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't unhear them. The walls felt closer now, the ceiling lower, and for the first time since his arrest, Greg Turner felt something far inclined into his gut, fear. The next morning, the courthouse was surrounded by a silent crowd, local residents, out-of-town reporters, law students, and parents holding their children lined the sidewalks, waiting for the verdict. Some clutched signs that read, "Believe Lily and let justice speak." Others simply stood, watching. Inside, the atmosphere was heavy. In the courtroom, the prosecution and defense were preparing their final arguments. The jury sat solemn, visibly exhausted after a week of emotional testimony. Judge Ellis reviewed his notes with a grim expression. He presided over countless cases, but few had ever felt this personal. Margaret Lane rose to give the prosecution's closing statement. She didn't use charts or photos. She didn't raise her voice. Instead, she spoke in the same calm, firm tone she used with her own children. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, "you've heard testimony from experts. You've seen the evidence. You've watched a child 3 years old walk into this courtroom and point to the only thing that made her feel safe." She motioned gently toward Ranger, lying beside the witness box. Her words were few, but her truth was loud. Lane paused, allowing the silence to settle. She drew pictures of her pain. She responded in fear to the sound of his voice. She couldn't scream when it happened, because she learned that screaming made it worse. But what she did, what she whispered in front of all of you, was louder than any confession he could ever give. Her voice cracked, but she held it steady. Don't let her down. She stepped back. The courtroom was frozen. Dwyer stood slowly for the defense. He cleared his throat. You've seen a lot this week, and you've heard things that are hard to forget, but we must not confuse sympathy with certainty. He walked in front of the jury. No one saw Mr. Turner hurt Lily. Her mother testified he never laid a hand on her. And children, especially those so young, are easily influenced. We must ask, did Lily really understand what she was pointing to? Or are we interpreting what we want to believe? He sighed, hoping to appear sincere. This is not about emotion. It's about proof, and there simply isn't enough. He sat down. His final line lingered in the room like smoke. Judge Ellis gave the jury their instructions, and within minutes, they were ushered into the deliberation room. Back in the lobby, Lily's foster parents waited quietly. Claire held a photo of Lily drawing in her notebook, Ranger sitting beside her. I don't know how they'll rule, she whispered to her husband. But no matter what, we're not letting her go. He nodded. She has a family now for good. In the courthouse cafeteria, Officer Kevin Marsh sat with Ranger, running his fingers through the dog's thick fur. You did good, buddy, he murmured. You showed her that not all uniforms mean pain. Ranger thumped his tail once. Hours passed. The jury remained in deliberation through this afternoon. Reporters speculated wildly. Had the emotional testimony swayed them? Would they convict with no eyewitness? What if they let Greg go? At 5:40 p.m., the bailiff returned to the courtroom. They reached a verdict. He announced. Word spread like wildfire. The judge was notified. The lawyers were summoned. People flooded the hallways as if pulled by invisible strings. The courtroom filled to capacity. Some people stood in aisles, clutching tissues or holding their breath. Greg Turner re-entered wearing a pale blue shirt, hands folded, expression unreadable. Margaret Lane sat down beside Detective Croft. Her jaw was tight, her eyes unreadable. The jury filed in single file. The foreperson, a woman in her 50s, wearing a gray cardigan and no jewelry, handed the folded paper to the bailiff. Judge Ellis unfolded it and read silently. Then he turned to the jury box. Has the jury reached a unanimous verdict? The four women stood. We have, Your Honor. On the charge of felony child abuse, how do you find the defendant? She didn't hesitate. Guilty. Gasps filled the air. Someone cried out. Greg's jaw dropped. His attorney sat back, stunned. Outside the building, people watching via livestream cheered and sobbed in disbelief. The judge continued. On the charge of reckless endangerment of a minor, how do you find the defendant? Guilty. On the charge of unlawful imprisonment, guilty. The gavel slammed once. This court finds Gregory Turner guilty on all counts. Sentencing will be scheduled within the next 30 days. Greg slumped in his chair as two officers stepped forward. Dwyer didn't even try to speak. Greg looked around wildly at the jury, at the walls, at the floor, but no one met his eyes. He was escorted out the side door in cuffs. No applause followed, no cheering, just silence. A heavy, reverent silence that felt like the town's collective exhale. Lily wasn't present, but at home. She colored with crayons beside Ranger, drawing a picture of a house with sunflowers and a blue sky. This time, the figure standing beside her was smiling, holding the leash of a dog with bright brown eyes. Claire came in and knelt beside her. Hey, sweetheart, she said softly. They said he won't hurt you ever again. Lily paused in her drawing. She looked up at Claire, and for the first time since the trial began, she whispered something back. Okay? 3 months after the verdict, the town of Ashford had changed. The yellow house on Maple Street was boarded up, its windows dark, its lawn overgrown. No one dared step near it. To neighbors, it wasn't just a house, it was a symbol of what had gone unnoticed. But across town, in a quiet suburban neighborhood near the park, another home had become a symbol of something very different. Lily's new home. Claire and David officially adopted her in late spring. The court papers came in the mail, stamped and certified, declaring that she was now Lily Grace Morgan, a new name, a new beginning. The ceremony was small, just close friends, social workers, a judge who offered a warm smile instead of a gavel, and of course Ranger, The old K9 dog had become a permanent fixture in Lily's life. Though he officially retired, Officer Kevin Marsh had signed adoption papers transferring ownership to the Morgans. Ranger now spent his days snoozing on soft rugs, eating belly rubs, and watching over Lily as she napped or colored. But he was more than a dog to her. He was a guardian, a bridge to healing, a silent promise that someone would always be watching out for her. After the adoption, Lily's therapist noted something remarkable. Her vocabulary had doubled in just 6 weeks. She still didn't talk much, but when she did, she chose her words carefully. Her fears didn't vanish overnight, but her eyes held more light. She smiled, she laughed, and sometimes she even sang to Ranger while they played outside. One evening, after dinner, Claire found Lily in her room, lining up her stuffed animals like a jury. She was holding a small plastic police dog in one hand and a doll in the other. "What are they doing, sweetheart?" Claire asked gently. Lily turned, beaming. "They're making bad guy go away." Claire's throat tightened. She sat beside her and joined the game. Meanwhile, Margaret Lane received a letter from a colleague in another state. The letter contained a request: would she be willing to consult on a similar case? Another young child, another courtroom, another moment where silence had swallowed the truth. Margaret reread the letter 3 times before replying. She wrote back, "Yes, but I'm bringing a special friend." She called Officer Marsh the next day. "You think Ranger has one more case in him?" she asked. Kevin laughed. "For Lily, he'd testify himself." 2 weeks later, Ranger sat in another courtroom, beside another frightened child. And when that child pointed at him and whispered, "Safe," everyone in the room remembered Lily. Back in Ashford, a mural was painted on the wall outside the town's community center. It showed a girl standing tall beside a big German shepherd, with rays of light shining behind them. Below the image were the words, "Silence is not weakness, bravery whispers." The town had changed. Teachers received new training. Doctors began conducting more thorough checkups for signs of abuse. The police department introduced a new policy: mandatory interviews with both children and K9 comfort animals in abuse investigations. No one wanted to fail another child again. Jessica, Lily's biological mother, remained absent. After Turner's conviction, she had vanished from public view. Rumors swirled rehab, a move to another state, even a nervous breakdown. But Lily never asked for her. She had made peace, in her own way. One afternoon, Claire brought out an old photo album and sat with Lily on the porch. "Would you like to see baby pictures?" she asked. Lily nodded. They flipped through the pages, pictures of a newborn in a hospital blanket, a first birthday with chocolate smeared on cheeks, early smiles. Some pages held memories Claire couldn't explain, but she offered them anyway. "Every part of you matters," she whispered, "even the parts that were hard." Lily leaned her head against Claire's shoulder. "I like now," she said softly. Claire kissed her forehead. "Me too." One day, Lily came home from school with a drawing. It showed a courtroom, a little girl pointing, a dog beside her. Above it, in big colorful letters, were the words, "I said bad man." Claire froze. Those were the exact words Lily had whispered in court. Lily looked up at her with wide eyes. "I wanted you to have it." Claire held back tears and hugged her tight. That picture was framed and hung in the living room, a reminder of the day the silence broke. Years later, Lily became a teenager with a love for drawing and animals. She volunteered at shelters, helped other foster kids adjust, and even gave a speech at a town hall event titled "Listen to Us." She ended her speech by holding up a worn stuffed dog. "This is Ranger," she told the crowd. "He helped me speak when I couldn't. Not everyone gets a Ranger, so please be one. Listen to kids. Believe them, even when they whisper." The room rose in a standing ovation, and in the front row, now gray-muzzled and slower, Ranger wagged his tail.